You watch her face change in real time and you know what's coming. That shift from calm to storm happens in seconds, and suddenly you're the problem. Everything you did today, everything you didn't do, every word you said wrong and every silence you held too long, it all becomes evidence in a case you didn't know was being built against you. She's 43, you're 38, and you've been together for 6 years, and lately these explosions come out of nowhere. Except they don't come out of nowhere, do they? There's a pattern here that nobody wants to talk about. A biological and psychological storm that's been brewing in her body and mind for months or years, and you're standing right in the path of it. Here's what nobody tells you about women over 40, and the emotional intensity that can turn a forgotten dish in the sink into a referendum on your entire character. The truth is, you're dealing with something much bigger than relationship problems, and understanding what's actually happening might be the only thing that saves your sanity. Let's start with what's happening in her body, because this isn't about her being unreasonable or you being inadequate. This is about biology colliding with neurology in ways that create perfect storms. When a woman enters perimenopause, which can start as early as 35 but typically ramps up in the early to mid-40s, her hormonal landscape doesn't just shift, it becomes chaotic. Estrogen levels don't decline smoothly like you'd expect. They spike and crash unpredictably, sometimes multiple times in a single week. Her progesterone, which acts as a natural calming agent in the brain, starts dropping earlier and more consistently than estrogen. What does this mean in practical terms? It means the neurological brake system that usually modulates emotional responses is failing intermittently. Her amygdala, the part of the brain that processes threat and emotional intensity, becomes hyperreactive, while her prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation, struggles to maintain its usual supervisory control. This isn't weakness. This isn't a character flaw. This is neurobiology, and it's happening whether she acknowledges it or not. Now add your neurodivergent processing style to this equation. You're literal, you process information sequentially, you need clear communication about expectations, and you genuinely don't pick up on the subtle social cues that neurotypical people use to signal growing frustration. When she says the kitchen needs cleaning, you hear a statement of fact, not a request for immediate action. When she mentions feeling tired, you offer logical solutions instead of recognizing she's communicating an emotional need for support. When she talks about her day, and you ask clarifying questions about timeline and details, you're trying to understand, but she experiences it as you missing the emotional content entirely. Every one of these interactions that feels normal to you lands differently for her, especially now when her emotional regulation system is compromised. What used to be minor irritations that she could mentally categorize as just how you process the world now feel like evidence that you don't care, that you're not trying, that you're fundamentally unable to meet her emotional needs. The explosion, when it comes, isn't really about the dish in the sink. It's about the 47 other times this month she felt unseen, unheard, and unsupported, and her nervous system finally hit a threshold it can't tolerate anymore. Her brain, flooded with stress hormones and lacking its usual regulatory capacity, dumps everything into this moment. You're standing there confused because from your perspective, you just walked in the door and suddenly you're being accused of never helping, never caring, never paying attention to anything that matters to her. You try to defend yourself with facts and timelines, pointing out the things you did do, the ways you did help, the times you were paying attention. This makes everything worse because now she's hearing that you're invalidating her experience, that you're making her feelings wrong, that even in this moment of pain, you're more concerned with being right than understanding how she feels. If this resonates with you, hit that like button because we're about to go deeper into why this pattern keeps repeating and what's actually at stake here. Understanding this isn't about fixing her or changing yourself into someone you're not. It's about recognizing the gap between your internal experiences and learning to navigate it before it destroys something you both actually want to preserve. Here's where the neurodivergent factor amplifies everything. Your working memory challenges mean you genuinely might not remember the conversation from 3 days ago, where she mentioned feeling overwhelmed. Your time blindness means when she asked you to do something later, and you fully intended to do it, 6 hours passed without you noticing, and now it's bedtime and the thing isn't done. Your sensory processing differences mean you might not notice the kitchen is messy by her standards, because your threshold for environmental disorder is different. Your need for explicit communication means you miss the indirect requests and hints that she's been trained by society to use instead of direct asks. None of these are character flaws, but every single one of them, in her current hormonal and neurological state, feels like proof that you don't prioritize her, that she's not important enough for you to remember, that she has to carry the entire mental load of the relationship alone. She's experiencing something that researchers call the invisible load, and it's crushing her. While you're focused on the tasks you can see and measure, she's tracking dozens of invisible threads that keep the household and relationship functioning. She remembers that your mom's birthday is next week and a card needs to be sent. She notices the dog is due for vaccines. She's aware the sheets haven't been changed in 2 weeks, and the kids need new shoes, and the bills are due on different dates, and her friend is going through something difficult and needs a check-in text. She's not inherently better at these things than you are, but society has trained her since childhood to monitor and maintain these relational and domestic threads, and her brain has been wired through decades of practice to keep all these plates spinning simultaneously. Your neurodivergent brain, structured differently from birth, doesn't naturally track these kinds of parallel processes. You can absolutely learn to do specific tasks and maintain specific responsibilities, but the ambient awareness that seems to come naturally to her requires you to build external systems and reminders that take conscious effort. When she's in her 30s with more stable hormones and better stress tolerance, she can often manage this gap. She reminds you about things, she makes lists, she asks directly when she needs something, and she has enough emotional bandwidth to separate your neurological differences from your level of care for her. But now, in her 40s, with her stress response system on a hair trigger and her emotional regulation capacity diminished, that same gap feels intolerable. The effort of constantly translating her needs into your processing language, the emotional labor of managing not just her own internal experience, but also anticipating and accommodating your different neurological needs, it's all become too much. When she snaps, she's not just angry about the current situation, she's drowning in the accumulated weight of years of this invisible work. The blame falls on you because from her perspective, if you really cared, you'd just know what needs to be done. You'd notice what she notices. You'd remember what she remembers. You'd feel what she feels and respond accordingly. This is where the neurotypical assumption about how brains work creates devastating misunderstandings. She genuinely cannot comprehend that your brain doesn't work this way, that you're not choosing to ignore these things or deprioritize them, that your neurology literally processes information and attention differently. When you try to explain this, it sounds like excuses. When you ask for direct communication about expectations, it sounds like you're demanding she do even more work. When you forget again despite your intentions, it confirms her fear that she's not important enough to you to warrant the effort of remembering. Let's talk about what's happening in her social world, because this adds another layer of pressure that ends up directed at you. Women in their 40s are often dealing with what researchers call the sandwich generation phenomenon. They're managing aging parents who need increasing support, children who might still be dependent, or launching into adulthood with all the complications that brings, careers that are at critical junctures, friendships that require maintenance, and their own health concerns that are becoming more prominent. The expectations on women at this life stage are crushing, and society offers almost no acknowledgement of this reality. Meanwhile, her peers are posting carefully curated images on social media that make it look like everyone else is managing beautifully. Their homes are organized, their relationships are thriving, their partners are intuitive and helpful, and she's looking at her own life thinking she's failing at something everyone else has figured out. You become the visible symbol of what's not working. When she compares her relationship to what she sees other women describing, your neurodivergent traits stand out as problems. She hears other women talk about partners who just take care of things without being asked, who notice when they're stressed and offer support, who remember important dates and details without reminders. And she's watching you ask for the third time what you're supposed to be doing this weekend, even though she told you twice already. The comparison makes her feel cheated, like she got a defective partner while everyone else got the functional model. This isn't fair to you, but it's genuinely what she's experiencing, and the hormonal changes in her brain make these negative comparisons stick more intensely than positive observations. The sleep disruption that comes with perimenopause multiplies all of this exponentially. She's waking up at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat from hot flashes. She's lying awake for hours with her mind racing through every problem and responsibility. She's getting maybe 5 or 6 hours of broken sleep, instead of the 8 hours of solid rest her body needs. Sleep deprivation is literally a torture technique because it degrades every aspect of cognitive and emotional function. Her ability to regulate emotions, maintain perspective, access empathy, and think rationally about problems is severely compromised by months or years of inadequate sleep. Meanwhile, you're sleeping fine because your body isn't staging a hormonal revolution, and in her exhausted state, even this feels like another unfair burden she carries alone. Subscribe if you want more truth about the psychological patterns nobody else is willing to discuss, because what comes next explains why this situation feels so impossible to navigate, and what the real stakes are if you can't find a way through it. The rejection sensitivity that's part of your neurodivergent processing style meets her heightened emotional reactivity and creates explosive interactions. When she expresses frustration, your brain interprets it as rejection and floods your system with intense emotional pain. You either shut down completely, going silent and withdrawn in a way that makes her feel like she's screaming into a void, or you become defensive, explaining and justifying in ways that make her feel unheard. Neither response gives her what she desperately needs in that moment, which is validation, that her feelings make sense, and demonstration that you understand why she's hurting. You're not withholding these responses to punish her. You're neurologically overwhelmed and your system is doing what it does under threat, which is either freeze or defend. She sees your shutdown or defensiveness as more evidence that you don't care about her pain, that protecting yourself matters more to you than understanding her. The communication gap becomes a chasm. She's learned through decades of female socialization to communicate indirectly, to hint rather than demand, to express needs through questions rather than statements. This linguistic style is supposed to preserve harmony and avoid seeming too aggressive or demanding, qualities that women are punished for displaying. Your neurodivergent brain needs direct, literal communication. When she says, "Do you think the trash needs taking out?" you hear a question about your opinion on trashfulness, not a request that you take out the trash right now. When she says, "I'm fine," in a tone that clearly indicates she's not fine, you take the words at face value instead of decoding the emotional subtext. When she describes a problem at work, you offer solutions instead of recognizing she's asking for emotional support through the act of sharing. Every single one of these interactions that seems normal to you confirms for her that you're not really listening, not really present, not really connected to her emotional reality. The mental load conversation that's been happening in women's spaces online for the past several years has given her language for something she's been feeling but couldn't articulate. She's learned terms like emotional labor and invisible work, and she's realized that the constant thinking, planning, remembering, and organizing she does isn't just her being naturally better at these things. It's unpaid labor that maintains the household and relationship. When she tries to talk to you about this, you hear criticism and accusation. You point out all the things you do contribute, the tasks you handle, the responsibilities you've taken on. She's trying to explain that it's not just about completing tasks. It's about the ongoing mental tracking and decision-making that happens before tasks even become visible. You're frustrated because you're genuinely trying, and it's never enough. She's frustrated because you don't seem to understand that asking her what needs to be done is still putting the cognitive work on her. Your executive function challenges mean that even when you want to take on more of this mental load, you need external structure and systems to do it successfully. You're not being lazy or resistant when you need lists and reminders and clear protocols. You're working with a brain that doesn't naturally maintain this kind of ambient awareness. She's interpreting your need for these supports as unwillingness to try, as making her do the work of managing you on top of managing everything else. The gap between your intention and her perception of your intention is destroying trust on both sides. You feel like you're never going to be good enough no matter what you do. She feels like she's drowning, and you're asking her to explain how to throw a life preserver while she goes under. The hormonal changes she's experiencing don't just affect mood, they're changing how she thinks about her entire life. Perimenopause often brings what therapists call a life review period, where women suddenly find themselves questioning everything. The choices they made in their 20s and 30s, the career paths they took or didn't take, the relationships they're in, the ways they've spent their time and energy. All of it comes under intense scrutiny. There's often a sense of time running out, of last chances approaching, of needing to make changes now before it's too late. If she's been accommodating your neurodivergent traits for years, if she's been the one doing the emotional translation and carrying the mental load and managing the relationship dynamics, she's looking at this pattern now through the lens of, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? The answer she's arriving at might be no, and that's terrifying for both of you. You want to know why she seems so angry all the time, why everything is suddenly a crisis, why she can't just tell you what she needs like she used to. It's because her window of tolerance for frustration has narrowed dramatically. Think of emotional regulation like a container that holds stress and frustration before it overflows into reaction. Her container used to be bigger. She could hold more before reaching her limit. Now, with compromised hormonal regulation and accumulated exhaustion, her container is much smaller. Things that she used to be able to absorb and process internally now immediately overflow into emotional reaction. This isn't a choice she's making. It's a neurobiological reality of what's happening in her brain and body. When you respond to her reactions by pointing out that she used to be able to handle these same situations calmly, you're essentially telling her that her biological changes are a personal failing, which only adds shame to an already overwhelming emotional experience. The impact on your sex life adds another dimension of pain to all of this. Her libido is likely declining due to hormonal changes, and the emotional disconnection between you makes desire even less accessible. When you initiate physical intimacy, she might feel like you only want her for sex, that you're not interested in emotional connection, that physical intimacy is one more demand on her already depleted resources. When you stop initiating because you're tired of rejection, she interprets it as confirmation that you don't find her attractive anymore, especially as her body is changing in ways that make her feel less desirable. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, and meanwhile the physical connection that used to help both of you feel close and reduce tension is disappearing from the relationship, removing one of the few reliable ways you had to reconnect after conflict. Drop a comment if you've experienced this impossible dynamic, where everything you do seems wrong and you can't find solid ground anymore, because understanding that you're not alone in this is part of what makes it survivable. Here's what makes this particularly cruel for neurodivergent men. You've spent your entire life being told you're too much and not enough simultaneously. Too intense about your interests, but not interested enough in the right things. Too sensitive to certain inputs, but not sensitive enough to social dynamics. Too rigid about routines, but not disciplined enough about responsibilities. You've built your adult identity around finding someone who accepts you as you are, who doesn't require you to constantly perform neurotypicality, who sees your different way of processing the world as just different, not defective. And now the person who you thought provided that acceptance is telling you through her anger and frustration that actually you are defective. Your way of being in the world is causing her harm. Your neurological differences that you can't change are legitimate problems that she can't tolerate anymore. The pain of this hits your rejection-sensitive nervous system like a physical blow. You're experiencing what feels like the ultimate invalidation of your fundamental self. When she says she needs you to just know what she needs, without her having to ask, she's asking you to be someone you're neurologically not capable of being. When she says she's exhausted from having to spell everything out for you, she's telling you that accommodating your neurodivergence is a burden she's tired of carrying. When she compares you unfavorably to other partners who seem to intuitively understand their wives, she's saying, your neurodivergent traits make you inferior. None of this is fair, but it's also not entirely her fault, because she's drowning in her own biological and psychological storm, and you're the person standing closest to her when the waves crash. The masculine expectation that you should be able to fix this adds another layer of failure. Society tells men that they should be able to solve problems, provide solutions, make things better. You're looking at this situation trying to find the answer, the system, the approach that will make her happy and restore peace. But there is no simple solution because you're dealing with multiple complex systems interacting in destructive ways. Your neurodivergent processing style isn't going to change. Her perimenopausal biology isn't going to stabilize for years potentially. The accumulated resentment and pain on both sides doesn't disappear just because you understand the causes. You can't fix this the way you fix a computer problem or a broken appliance, and your inability to solve it feels like another confirmation that you're failing as a partner and as a man. Let's talk about what happens in your body during these conflicts, because your stress response is part of this destructive cycle too. When she starts to escalate emotionally, your nervous system detects threat and activates your fight, flight, or freeze response. Your heart rate spikes, your thinking becomes less flexible. Your ability to access language and express yourself clearly diminishes, and your focus narrows to defending yourself or escaping the situation. You're not choosing these responses. They're automatic reactions from a nervous system that's been conditioned through years of social rejection and misunderstanding to treat interpersonal conflict as genuine danger. When you shut down or become rigidly logical during her emotional expression, you're not being cold or uncaring. You're dysregulated, and your system is trying to protect you the only ways it knows how. She sees your shutdown, or your logical defenses, and experiences them as emotional abandonment. In her heightened state, she needs emotional presence and validation, and instead she's getting either silence or what feels like intellectual debate about whose perception of reality is more accurate. Her nervous system interprets your stress response as confirmation that you don't care about her pain, that protecting yourself is more important than connecting with her, that she's alone in this relationship even when you're standing right in front of her. Both of you are dysregulated. Both of you are responding from threat states, and neither of you has the neurological capacity in those moments to break the cycle and offer the thing that might actually help the other person. Calm down. The stakes of not finding a way through this are severe, and nobody wants to say it plainly. Relationships end over this exact dynamic every single day. Women in their 40s are initiating divorce at higher rates than any other demographic. And a significant portion of those divorces involve women who describe feeling emotionally exhausted from years of feeling unseen and unsupported. When you read stories from these women, you'll see patterns you recognize. Partners who meant well but never quite got it. Years of explaining and requesting and hoping for change that never fully materialized. A final straw moment where something relatively small triggered a decision that had been building for years. The realization that they might actually be happier and less exhausted alone than continuing to carry the emotional weight of a relationship with someone whose neurology makes true emotional partnership feel impossible. You're looking at this possibility and feeling the terror of it. You love her, even when you don't understand her. You want this to work, even when it feels hopeless. The idea of losing her, of your family fracturing, of starting over in your late 30s or 40s with the knowledge that your neurodivergence played a role in the relationship failure. It's almost unbearable to contemplate. But staying in a relationship where you're constantly blamed for things you can't control, where your best efforts are never sufficient, where you live in a state of perpetual anxiety waiting for the next explosion. That's destroying your mental health and sense of self-worth. You're caught between impossible options, and the weight of that reality is crushing. What nobody tells you is that her anger, as destructive as it feels, might actually contain important information if you can get past the emotional charge of it. She's telling you that the relationship structure you've both been operating under isn't sustainable for her anymore. She's communicating, albeit in ways that land painfully for your rejection-sensitive nervous system, that her needs aren't being met, and the cost of continuing to go unmet is becoming intolerable. The anger is often the last emotion before complete disconnection. It means she still cares enough to fight, to demand, to push for change. When the anger stops and is replaced by cold resignation, that's when the relationship is truly in danger. The emotional explosions, horrible as they are to experience, represent her system's desperate attempt to get through to you before she gives up entirely. Your neurodivergent processing style, with all its challenges in this context, also brings strengths that are easy to lose sight of when you're in the middle of constant conflict. You're likely intensely loyal once committed. You approach problems systematically when you're not dysregulated. You're capable of deep focus and dedication to things you care about. You're probably more honest and direct than neurotypical partners, who might hide resentments behind social niceties. You notice patterns and details that others miss. You have rich inner worlds and passionate interests that make you interesting and complex. These qualities matter, and they're part of why she chose you in the first place, but they're getting completely overshadowed by the daily friction of your neurological differences colliding with her biological changes. The question becomes whether there's a way to create enough space and understanding for both of you to survive this period without destroying each other or the relationship. This requires something from both of you that's extraordinarily difficult. She needs to understand that your neurodivergent traits are not choices you're making to hurt her, that they're fundamental to how your brain processes information and regulates attention, and that asking you to just be different is like asking someone who needs glasses to just see better. You need to understand that her hormonal changes are creating genuine neurological chaos that makes things she used to tolerate feel intolerable now, and that dismissing her emotional reactions as overreactions or irrationality is denying the biological reality she's experiencing. Neither of you can do this alone while you're both dysregulated and hurting. The pattern you're in has created so much accumulated pain and defensiveness that every interaction is colored by the history of previous failures and disappointments. Breaking out of this cycle almost always requires outside help, whether that's therapy that specifically understands both neurodivergence and women's hormonal health, medical support for her perimenopausal symptoms that might include hormone therapy or other interventions, or both. The idea that you should be able to figure this out yourselves through better communication or more effort is setting you up for continued failure because you're dealing with biological and neurological realities that can't be resolved through willpower alone. What's at stake here isn't just your relationship, it's your understanding of yourself and your place in the world. If this relationship ends with you believing that your neurodivergence makes you fundamentally unlovable or incompatible with long-term partnership, you carry that wound into everything that comes after. If she leaves this relationship believing that her needs are unreasonable, or that she should be able to manage everything alone without support, she carries that damage forward too. Both of you deserve better than to have your biology and neurology turned into character flaws that justify the relationship's failure. Both of you are dealing with legitimate challenges that are nobody's fault, but are everyone's responsibility to understand and accommodate as much as possible. The truth that makes all of this harder is that understanding doesn't automatically create solutions. You can comprehend intellectually that her hormonal changes are making emotional regulation difficult, and still feel devastated when she explodes at you over something that seems trivial. She can understand intellectually that your working memory challenges are neurological, and still feel abandoned and unsupported when you forget something important for the third time. Knowledge of the mechanisms doesn't erase the impact of the behaviors. Compassion for why someone is struggling doesn't eliminate your own pain at being on the receiving end of their struggles. This is the brutal reality that makes navigating this dynamic so exhausting. You're standing at a crossroads that many neurodivergent men face in long-term relationships with neurotypical women, and that crossroads becomes particularly treacherous when she enters her 40s and the hormonal shifts begin. One path leads toward finding ways to bridge the neurological gap with enough skill and support that you both survive this period and eventually reach calmer waters. The other path leads toward increasing disconnection, escalating conflict, and potentially the end of the relationship. Which path you end up on depends partly on factors outside your control, like the severity of her hormonal symptoms and whether she's willing to seek medical support for them, and partly on whether both of you can develop enough understanding of what's really happening to stop blaming each other for biological and neurological realities. The weight of this knowledge doesn't make the daily experience easier. You still have to navigate each interaction, each potential trigger, each moment where your processing differences collide with her heightened emotional reactivity. You still have to figure out how to protect your own mental health while also being present for someone whose needs you struggle to intuitively understand. You still have to decide whether the relationship is worth the immense effort required to maintain it, or whether at some point self-preservation has to take priority. These are questions without easy answers, and anyone who tells you there's a simple solution to this complex intersection of neurodivergence and women's midlife biology is either lying or ignorant. What you need to know, what you need to really understand in your bones, is that you're not crazy for finding this impossibly difficult. The invalidation you're experiencing, the sense that you can never do anything right, the fear that your fundamental nature makes you unfit for intimate partnership, these are not truths about you. They're symptoms of a relationship system under extraordinary strain from multiple directions. Your neurodivergence is not a defect, even though it's being treated like one right now. Her emotional intensity is not manipulation, even though it feels like an attack. You're both drowning in different ways, and the tragedy is that your different neurologies make it almost impossible to throw each other lifelines without professional help to bridge the gap. This is the reality that lives beneath the surface of thousands of relationships right now. The thing people don't talk about at dinner parties or post about on social media, the daily grinding pain of loving someone whose biology makes them hard to live with while simultaneously being someone whose neurology makes you hard to live with. There's no viral solution, no life hack, no simple reframe that makes this easy. There's only the choice to keep trying with better understanding and support, or the choice to acknowledge that sometimes love isn't enough when the biological and neurological barriers are too great. Either choice comes with loss, and pretending otherwise does nobody any favors. What you do with this understanding, how you move forward from here, that's the question you're living with every day, and it deserves more honesty and compassion than most people are willing to offer.